He only uses the blue bottle when the reservation is booked under a single initial, Mr. Julian. You know, like T or K. Leo, the frantic 19-year-old dishwasher, whispered the words over the hiss of steam, his eyes darting toward the main line. Julian Vance, dressed in the sweaty, grease-stained uniform of a prep cook he'd worn for 3 weeks, felt the blood drain from his face. This was not a rumor. This was a pattern spoken with genuine terror. The celebrated chef Anton was plating his signature scallop dish right now, and the blue bottle was not standard kitchen inventory. Julian didn't move fast enough. A server picked up the dish. It was headed toward Table M. Julian Vance, or Jules as the kitchen staff called him, wiped down the stainless steel counter with practiced, almost aggressive efficiency. 3 weeks undercover in the flagship restaurant of his own global culinary empire, Vance Hospitality, felt like 3 years. His real office was 30 stories above this heat and chaos, a minimalist space overlooking the entire financial district, but he preferred the raw, immediate pressure of the line. Julian's authority was absolute. He owned the building, the brand, and the people sweating around him, yet here he was just another ghost in the prep station, unnoticed by the very people whose careers he held in his hands. He checked his wrist, not for the time, but for the phantom pressure of the platinum watch he usually wore. The disguise needed to be perfect. His public image was that of a ruthless innovator, a man who built an empire on precision and perfection after taking over from his father. But behind the veneer of Forbes interviews and charity galas was the relentless, gnawing cavity of an unresolved past. His father, Arthur Vance, had not died peacefully in a hospital bed. He had collapsed during a dinner service exactly 4 years ago, right here in the VIP section of this very restaurant, after eating the tasting menu prepared by Chef Anton. The official verdict was a massive, sudden cardiac event. Julian always accepted the report, burying the grief under mountains of work and acquisition deals. Now, hearing Leo's terrified whisper, the old grief morphed into cold, focused suspicion. Julian watched Chef Anton preside over the kitchen. Anton Dubois was a force of nature, a Michelin star recipient whose demanding perfectionism terrified the staff. Anton moved like a maestro, his white coat pristine despite the inferno of the stoves. Julian saw the respect, the fear, and the sheer talent. Anton had brought the restaurant its greatest accolades, making Vance Hospitality a legend. Anton was indispensable, a genius, but Julian realized he was also remote, untouchable, and perhaps deeply dangerous. Julian remembered the cold, distant stare Anton had given him the night of his father's death. No sympathy, just professional detachment. That detachment now looked like calculated silence. Julian felt a burning tightness in his chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with the kitchen heat and everything to do with the possibility that the cardiac event that took his father might have been an execution. He clenched his jaw, grating vegetables with a force that chipped the cutting board. He needed to find the blue bottle. He needed a connection. He needed to know if the man who cooked for kings was also a paid assassin, operating under his own roof, and if his father was one of the single initials that vanished into the night. Leo's life was measured in dish racks and scalding water. He was 19, carrying the weight of a family dependent on his erratic paycheck. His mother was ill, and the tips he occasionally snagged from catering events went straight to medical bills. Leo was exhausted, his hands perpetually red and pruned from the industrial detergent. He was the quiet ghost of the operation, the one nobody remembered until the silverware ran out. His fear was a constant, low-grade hum, fueled by the daily threat of dismissal if he dropped a plate or slowed down the endless rotation. He protected two things fiercely: his mother's fragile health and the anonymity of the kitchen. But the kitchen's dirty secrets were starting to wear him down. He had seen the quiet exchanges, the envelopes slipped under the service door late at night, and the way Chef Anton's demeanor would shift from demanding professional to cold executioner when a specific type of order came through. Leo didn't understand the full mechanics of the poison, only the ritual. The special orders, the single initial reservations, and the small unmarked blue glass bottle kept locked in Anton's private office, which only the chef ever touched. One night, emptying a bucket of residual oil, Leo had found a discarded, half-melted label tucked into the drain. It was a complex chemical name, too specific to be a cooking ingredient, too toxic to be handled without gloves. He had quickly disposed of it, a cold fear gripping his throat. He knew he should have kept it, gone to the police, but the thought of losing his job, losing the income keeping his mother alive, paralyzed him. He carried the knowledge like a physical burden, a constant pressure behind his eyes. He recognized the truth. His silence was complicity, but his voice felt useless against the power of Chef Anton and the wealth surrounding the entire establishment. He looked at Jules, the new prep cook. He seemed different, too observant, too intense for scrubbing potatoes. But Leo couldn't risk talking to anyone again. He had already broken his own rule once, whispering to Jules about the blue bottle, a mistake born of pure panic. "Where are you watching from today?" The following afternoon, the kitchen was in the eye of the service storm. Julian, focused on a monumental pile of shallots, kept his peripheral vision locked on Chef Anton. The owner was now observing his chief employee not as a boss auditing quality, but as an investigator analyzing a suspect. Julian saw the meticulous control, the way Anton barked orders that never needed repeating, the flawless choreography of the entire line. The efficiency was terrifying because it suggested a mind capable of planning perfection and, potentially, murder. The first true intersection occurred not through dialogue, but through a shared object. A critical order ticket, Reservation A, slid onto Anton's counter. Anton glanced at it, the corners of his mouth tightening just perceptibly. He needed saffron threads stored in the high cabinet near Julian's station. Anton approached the prep area, his movements economical. Julian, anticipating the need, reached for the spice jar, their hands briefly brushing over the small glass container. In that instant, Julian felt the coldness emanating from the chef, a temperature drop that had nothing to do with the nearby freezer. Anton's eyes, usually fixed on the food, flickered toward Julian, analyzing him. It wasn't recognition, it was simple assessment, a weighing of the prep cook's usefulness. Julian kept his gaze down, simulating the focused terror of a low-level worker trying desperately not to annoy the maestro. Meanwhile, Leo, wrestling with a stubborn grease trap near the corner, watched the exchange. He saw the subtle tension, the way Jules didn't flinch but remained unnaturally still. He saw the ticket on Anton's counter. Table 4, A, scallops. Leo's breath hitched. He knew the pattern. The initial A was active. Anton moved toward his locked office door, pulling a small, silver key from his pocket, the key to the blue bottle. Julian saw the movement, the key glinting under the harsh fluorescent light, and the blood rushed to his ears. The urgency was palpable. Julian knew what Anton was about to do. Leo knew he had just confirmed his deepest fear. Two men on opposite ends of a vast power structure were silently registering the imminence of a calculated act of violence. The fate of A was sealed unless one of them broke the silence of the kitchen. Julian waited for Anton to emerge from the office, holding his breath as he feigned absorption in slicing garlic. The chef returned less than 20 seconds later, the office door clicking shut, but Julian noted the change immediately. Anton's right hand, usually steady and rigid, held a slight tremor that he was trying to hide by keeping his fist clenched. More importantly, Julian smelled something faint and acrid, something metallic that cut through the rich aromas of roasting herbs and butter. It wasn't standard kitchen fare, it was sharp, inorganic, the brief scent of a chemical volatile. Julian's focus sharpened to a laser point. The chef was prepping the scallop dish now, working with a speed that masked his precision. As Anton meticulously arranged the seared mollusks, he added a final drizzle of what looked like clarified butter over the presentation. This was the moment. Julian watched the spoon. Everyone else saw a flourish, the signature finish of a world-class chef. Julian saw the movement was too deliberate, the fluid too viscous, and the way Anton positioned his body to completely shield the plate from the direct view of the servers waiting at the pass. The signal was the plating technique. Anton always put the butter drizzle on after the delicate garnish, but for the A plate, he applied the drizzle before the garnish, burying the specific spot of the liquid under a sprinkle of microgreens and paprika dust. It was an aesthetic slight, a break in his own established pattern, so minor that only someone who had studied Anton's work obsessively, as Julian had, would notice. Julian felt a crippling wave of doubt. Was he projecting his trauma about his father onto a harmless change in technique? Was the metallic smell just a burst pipe, or perhaps a cleaning agent? The cost of being wrong was enormous. If he accused Anton and was mistaken, his entire company would suffer an unprecedented scandal, and his undercover mission would be revealed as a paranoid delusion. He looked at Leo, who was staring fixedly at the plate, his face pale and clammy. Leo knew. That shared, unspoken fear solidified Julian's conviction. He couldn't wait for proof. The dish was about to be served. The difference between life and death for A was measured in seconds. The server, oblivious, reached for the plate. Anton offered it with a curt, professional nod, his eyes flat and devoid of warmth. This was the point of no return. Julian knew he couldn't act as the owner, not yet, but as Jules and the prep cook, he had a limited window for chaotic intervention. Leo moved first. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a desperate, primal reaction, driven by the image of the microgreens hiding the deadly substance. He had seen the terror in Jules's eyes, and it broke through his paralysis. Carrying a heavy metal stockpot filled with hot leftover broth, a necessary danger in the cramped walkway, Leo suddenly slipped. He didn't scream, but the stockpot hit the floor with a deafening crash that silenced the entire kitchen. The broth, steaming and oily, sprayed outwards, not at the plate, but strategically, covering the server's pristine apron and narrowly missing the chef's polished shoes. The distraction was instantaneous and absolute. "My fault. I'm so sorry, chef," Leo gasped, dropping to his knees to begin a frantic, clumsy mop-up, his voice tight with engineered panic. Anton reacted with cold fury. "Get out, Leo. Now! You contaminate the entire line." His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that promised immediate termination. Julian seized the split-second opportunity. While the server was distracted by the mess and the chef was focused on Leo's incompetence, Julian swept past the pass. With a fluid, trained movement that revealed his lack of prep cook clumsiness, he grabbed the plate of scallops, turning back toward the fryer station. "Chef, I saw smoke near the fryer grease trap. I'll take this plate," Julian began. But Anton had already turned, his eyes wide and lethal. "Vance, what do you think you are doing with that plate?" Anton used the last name, cutting through Julian's cover, shattering the pretense. He hadn't just recognized the speed, he had seen the intent. The kitchen froze. The server stood dripping. Leo was terrified on the floor, and Julian held the evidence. The confrontation was now public, dangerous, and immediate. The planned act of poisoning had failed, and the carefully constructed identity of the undercover owner was exposed. Chef Anton didn't shout again. The change was more terrifying. He moved from professional fury to predatory control. "Give me the plate, Jules. Or is it Julian Vance, the owner?" Anton's voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the silence of the stunned kitchen staff. He knew Julian had the evidence, and now the pretense of ownership was useless. Julian didn't flinch. He held the plate steady, the scallops glistening innocently. "The plate stays with me, Anton, or rather with the police." "You have nothing," Anton hissed, taking a slow, menacing step forward. "A change in plating technique? A perceived smell? You fire your most valuable asset based on paranoia about your weak heart?" "It wasn't my heart, Anton. It was my father's." Julian cut him off, the years of suppressed suspicion erupting into raw accusation. "Arthur Vance, 4 years ago, Table V. I saw the reservation slip, Anton. V, you signed the order. Now I know what the single initial means." Anton stopped dead. The mention of Arthur Vance, Julian's father, drained the color from his face, but only for a second. Then his composure returned, replaced by a cold calculation. He had been exposed, but he had weapons Julian didn't know about. "If you move that plate, Julian," Anton snarled, pointing a gloved finger at the owner, "I will ensure that every investor, every critic, and every staff member knows that Vance Hospitality is built on a nervous breakdown. The scandal will sink the company you claim to protect. You think the police will believe a dishwasher and an owner playing dress-up over a Michelin star chef?" The pressure was immense, Anton wasn't threatening him physically. He was threatening the entire empire. Julian looked past Anton, catching Leo's gaze. The young man was still on the floor, shaking, but he had bought Julian the critical time. Julian made the decision. The business could burn. The truth could not. He pulled the small, secure satellite phone from his trouser pocket, tucked deep beneath his apron, and punched the emergency line to the city police chief, a personal contact. "I need an immediate toxicology team at Vance Hospitality. I have a sample of likely lethal poison and a chef who just confirmed a long history of assassination." The urgency was real, and the fight for control of the narrative had just begun. The sirens were a distant, rapidly approaching wail, amplifying the silence in the kitchen. Anton realized Julian hadn't been bluffing. He hadn't called security. He'd called the city. His cold mask fractured, replaced by a desperate, cornered rage. "It was a business, Julian. Just like yours." Anton exploded, his voice echoing off the steel surfaces. "I provided a service for people who needed problems to disappear quietly. Your father was one of them. He was destroying the company from the inside, a liability. The board paid me, Julian. They wanted him gone. It was clean, untraceable." "Lies," Julian spat out, clutching the plate protectively. "My father was sick, yes, but he would never—" "He was not sick. He was weak." Anton advanced again, slower this time, revealing the true emotional core of his hatred. "He was the opposite of everything this kitchen stands for. He made compromises. He ruined the integrity of the food. I killed him because he was an insult to the art, and those who hired me knew that the art must survive him." The confession was shattering, connecting the corporate treachery with Anton's twisted sense of professional ethics. Julian felt the ground give way beneath his feet. Not only was Anton a killer, but his father's death was tied to the very board members Julian trusted daily. The plate of scallops, the symbol of lethal precision, trembled in Julian's grip. Anton saw the moment of weakness, the emotional shock. He lunged, not for the plate but for Julian's throat, intending to incapacitate him and destroy the evidence. The physical struggle was brief but brutal. Julian, fueled by 4 years of unresolved guilt and the realization of his father's calculated murder, used the raw energy he usually reserved for board meetings. He slammed Anton into the cold, sharp edge of the preparation counter. Before Anton could recover, struggling for air, the SWAT team burst through the double doors, followed immediately by police detectives. The blue lights strobed wildly across the shocked faces of the kitchen staff. A detective immediately secured the contaminated plate. Anton, realizing the game was utterly lost, didn't resist the restraints. His last look was directed at Julian, a look not of defeat but of profound contempt. "You think you saved the business? You just exposed it as rotten from the roots up. Enjoy the free fall, Mr. Vance." The ensuing months were catastrophic. The exposure of Chef Anton's paid assassinations, including the high-profile murder of Arthur Vance, exploded into a global scandal. Vance Hospitality became the center of a criminal investigation, revealing the complicity of key board members who had paid Anton to silence dissent and eliminate obstacles. Julian, as the man who brought the truth to light, was both a hero and the wrecking ball of his own empire. The consequences were immediate and deep. The restaurant was shuttered indefinitely, its reputation permanently poisoned. Julian was forced to dismantle and restructure the entire corporate entity. He had to fire people he considered family, dissolve partnerships that had lasted decades, and endure humiliating cross-examinations regarding his knowledge of the board's activities. The legal battles drained his finances and his energy. He had traded his powerful, insulated existence for a grueling public fight for moral integrity. The biggest loss, Julian realized, was not the market cap or the Michelin stars, but the quiet, dignified image of his father. Arthur Vance was no longer just the victim of a sudden event. He was now recognized as the target of a conspiracy, and his final days were scrutinized in every major newspaper. Julian's relationship with the Vance legacy was irrevocably broken, forcing him to reckon with the harsh reality that power had corrupted the very foundations of his success. Justice, however, was served. Anton Dubois faced life imprisonment, the evidence from the scallops proving incontrovertible. The implicated board members were arrested, facing charges of conspiracy and murder. The truth was clean, but the damage was profound. Julian sat in his now sparse office, signing documents that ceded control of major assets. He had won the moral war, but he had lost the kingdom. The quiet peace of the aftermath was heavy, purchased at the cost of every comfortable certainty he once held. A year later, Julian Vance was no longer the global mogul. He had sold off the majority of Vance Hospitality, using the remaining capital to launch a small, fiercely ethical restaurant group focused entirely on local, sustainable sourcing and absolute transparency. It was a fraction of his former empire, built on the principle of knowing exactly who cooked the food and where it came from. He was starting over, not from the top, but from the ground floor just above the kitchen. He found Leo sweeping the cobblestones outside the new restaurant, the early morning light catching the dust motes. After the initial turmoil, Leo had become an unlikely ally, a witness who testified with a quiet, devastating honesty. Julian had ensured Leo's mother received the best care, but Leo insisted on earning his own way. He was no longer working in the dish pit. He was being trained in logistics and supply chain management, his fear replaced by a burgeoning, confident efficiency. "The delivery truck is late, Mr. Vance," Leo reported, no longer calling him Jules. Julian smiled, a genuine expression free from the pressure of corporate performance. "Then we wait, Leo. We don't rush the process. Integrity over profit, remember?" Leo nodded, leaning on the broom, his shoulders less slumped than they used to be. The kitchen they were building was smaller, cleaner, and filled with staff who were treated with dignity. Julian, working the books and sometimes even the line, had found a quiet resolution. He had honored his father's memory not by preserving the corrupt institution, but by tearing it down and building something truthful in its place. The loss of wealth was nothing compared to the restoration of his own moral center. He had traded a crown for a clean conscience, and in the heat of this small, honest kitchen, he finally felt a sense of peace. The greatest power, he realized, was not the authority to command, but the courage to expose. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more transformative and intense tales like this one.